Hello, and welcome to this week's Movie Math, where a pattern for 2023 is beginning to emerge. A concerning pattern, and that pattern is underperformance. Not devastating underperformance. Dom Toretto will live to fight another day, to drive another day. And some of these movies aren't embarrassing themselves, but come on, man, they're not performing like they're supposed to. So yes, Dom Toretto, I would say, like a lot of major franchises in high gear these days, has some thinking to do. And what should Vin Diesel and Universal be thinking about? Well, Universal is slightly distracted by all the money they're making with Super Mario Brothers, but Fast and Furious has been a cornerstone for them as well. But so what they should be thinking about is, first of all, Vin Diesel can kiss that hopeful trilogy finale goodbye. He ain't getting a trilogy. He floated the idea out there, but I think it was too much. And he and Universal should just focus on their original plan of a banger Part 2 ending. He's got everyone in place for one heck of a last ride, including Gal Gadot and Dwayne Johnson, both burned so badly by DC, by the same company. So far, it holds. Anyone who's ever joined DC has come to regret it. We'll see if that curse continues. But anyway, here they are again, returning to the franchise that originally put them on the map. And sure, some of you felt that wasn't true with Dwayne Johnson, so allow me to prove that it is. Sure, he got some movie gigs before Fast 5, but nothing big. He was not considered a legit actor. He was still a wrestler getting some movie gigs. Fast 5 and the subsequent Fast and Furious movies he made after that, before his infamous feud with Vin Diesel during The Fate of the Furious, that created the foundation for Dwayne Johnson to define himself as a true blockbuster star. You know, the Fast and Furious was crucial to him building his career. And maybe he feels he jinxed it by leaving, but he's back. And I'm sure, maybe he got paid a decent amount of money to come back. So let's talk about the ridiculous budget for Fast X. That's something also that Vin Diesel and Universal should think about, because this movie cost way too much money. Even if the 10th entry manages to deliver in line with the last two, that's in the 700 million range, and that's entirely possible, considering it's the third biggest global and overseas debut for the franchise, with the international market being its main fuel line. And also, on that note, China loves Fast X. They love it. It got a very high audience score over there, and it's the biggest Hollywood opening for the year to date. So we'll see how well it does there. But again, with that huge budget, the movie still won't break even when you factor in the advertising costs on top of the budget. Remember, they still get only about 50% of the global box office back to the studio. Whew! Why did the movie cost so much money? Well, COVID drew up the costs on a lot of movies because they had to pay for all the procedures, stopping and starting, the safety protocols, which I believe were just recently discontinued, but also big paychecks for everybody up front. Maybe they should be doling out a few more points instead. Although who would want points? Because clearly these stars can't sell tickets, so they're like, give me my money up front. On that note, I think this soft opening for Fast X proves that Jason Momoa is simply not a draw. I mean, the dude had reviews raving that this was the performance of his lifetime. Like, people are like, you ain't never seen Jason Momoa like this. He's finally reached peak Jason Momoa. And most people said, I don't care. And that's not good. That couldn't move the needle. I'm not saying Jason Momoa shouldn't work, but the fact that he's never had a big hit beforehand, we'll talk about Aquaman in a moment, but nobody watches any of his shows, most of his movies don't do well, digital and theatrical, it appears that there's a reason for that. He can go sit on the bench of can't sell tickets next to Ryan Gosling, unfortunately, and potentially maybe Margot Robbie. I'm a little nervous about Barbie for that reason. So I'm back to not making a Lobo movie. Now that I've seen these numbers, I'm like, forget it. No Lobo movie, even if it was cheap, because I don't think DC should crowd their pipeline with third and fourth tier characters and or actors that audiences simply aren't interested in. I mean, look what's happening to Marvel. You can't crowd the pipeline, especially with crap. Well, not necessarily crap, but things that are not high performing entities. What about Aquaman? Aquaman made $1 billion. Thank you very much. It's something that everybody always forgets. Even I forget that it made $1 billion. And I liked that movie quite a bit. But I would credit that to James Wan, who, by the way, also made the most successful Fast and Furious movie. Now, that, of course, came after the very tragic death of Paul Walker, which some people might say would be a factor to how well that film did. But, James Wan, he's 2 for 2 with major blockbusters. So you would think he'd get more blockbuster gigs, although he has been stuck working on Aquaman 2 because of the pandemic and the change of leadership at DC for a very, very long time. Poor James Wan. He's so talented. All right. This would also make me a wee bit nervous about Brie Larson. That's right. Her Captain Marvel is supposedly a crown jewel over at the MCU. And I know that a number of you said you were excited about this movie because of Brie Larson, but not enough of you to make it do particularly well at the box office. She remains untested outside of her intro movie. Fans do love origin stories, and Captain Marvel had the very good luck of being sandwiched between the 2 biggest Avengers movies of all time. Plus, it introduced the heavily anticipated Skrulls. Now, to be fair, Ant-Man and the Wasp, of course, also came out between Infinity War and Endgame with little fanfare. But, that was a sequel. People already knew what that was, and nothing particularly interesting happened or was introduced in that film. I guess, it was nice that Janet Van Dyne, Michelle Pfeiffer was there, but it was very, I still think having 2 Ant-Mans and 2 Wasps was a mistake. All right, back to the Fast and Furious franchise. Vin Diesel's like, I thought we were talking about me. Well, maybe you don't want us to, Vin, because let's talk about this. Obviously, Vin Diesel is trying to extend the life of his career-defining and fortune-fueling franchise by preparing the Brian Toretto character, Dom's son, to take over. And that is not a bad idea. But the Fast and Furious franchise has been releasing a movie every 2 years, a lap every 2 years since 2009. But maybe he should slow himself down. Because clearly, like a lot of other major franchises right now, most notably Star Wars, and maybe DC, maybe they're going a little bit too fast, they should take a bit of a break so that, give fans a chance to miss you, man. While Fast and Furious movies, for instance, usually get an A-range cinema score, that's right, The Fate of the Furious got an A. This and F9 both got B+. So, not horrible. B+ is like the last score you can get before the studio should be like really just throw up their hands in disgust. But a B+ is like kind of like a warning sign. With cinema scores, you're like, I should have done a little better. Unless you're a horror movie, that's different rules. Take Nolan's Dark Knight franchise as a case study. The second 2, hugely successful, although I didn't care for the third. But anyway, 3 and 4 years between those entries. Something to consider. Embroider it on a pillow and put it in these executives' offices. Now, speaking of executives, the new Mr. DC, James Gunn. This is Warner Brothers, by the way, 3rd Mr. DC. Mr. DC, here he comes. Will he make us money or bitterly disappoint us? But anyway, this is the 3rd Mr. DC, and for some reason, Warner Brothers keeps crowning directors, even though Feige is a producer. He's a producer! Although Kathleen Kennedy is a producer, and that is not working out either. Kevin Feige's like, yep, that's right, can't duplicate the king. All right, and although he's having some trouble too, but not as badly as the other ones. All right, anyway, let's talk about Marvel. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, Feige and Gunn had another very nice hold in its 3rd weekend of release. Again, under 50%. That is very nice. But, I gotta say, I'm still not loving this domestic number. I don't love it. I don't like it. I'm like, it's harshing my mellow, man. I think at this rate, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 will crack 300 million domestic like the first entry, but I don't know if it'll get as close to 400 million as Volume 2 did. Guardians, although they have made me start to consider these as individual franchises. So Marvel's like, success! So anyway, Guardians of the Galaxy, but we have to be fair and realistic. Not everything's going to be an Avengers movie, so we have to temper those expectations. So I am. Guardians of the Galaxy is not one of those franchises like Fast and Furious that's been propped up by overseas box office. So I'm sticking with my 800 million-esque global total prediction. I think the shot at $1 billion for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is slipping away. I think that even though it's had very good holds, it just didn't start strong enough to get there. But still, as I said, it's just got to have an 8 in front of it not to be embarrassed. You want to see impressive though? Back to Universal, where Super Mario Brothers, even though it went on digital this past week, still number 3 with just a 22% drop. Even though you can now watch it at home, people still want to see it in theaters in its 7th week of release. My goodness, so far Super Mario Brothers really is the Top Gun Maverick of 2023. A movie that's just a genuine crowd pleaser, so many Nintendo fans, but also is being fervently backed by conservative anti-Disney activists. More on that in just a moment. Evil Dead Rise also continues to hold strong in theaters, despite being available on digital. And we'll see what happens with John Wick Chapter 4 when it hits digital this coming week on Tuesday. But the bottom half of the box office got so low, 3 movies below $1 million for the entire weekend, that what do you know, Blackberry was able to pop into the top 10 in its 2nd weekend. I mean, it's not a reprieve, but it's going to give it a little bit more recognition for when it hits digital, which I'm sure is very, very soon. Now, with 2 franchises underperforming this year, all eyes shift to The Little Mermaid opening this Friday for the Memorial Day holiday weekend here in the United States. And this is where Aladdin opened very successfully just a few years ago. All Little Mermaid has to do is clear 100 million domestic at this point to be okay for an opening. That's all she's got to do. She's got to clear 100. But as I said, there is a large contingent targeting Disney right now. Ron DeSantis is making that a cornerstone of his likely presidential campaign. Fighting a company. Isn't that incredible? So Disney's like, I cannot believe this is happening to me. So anyway, that's adding extra pressure to the opening of this latest live action adaptation, which Lin-Manuel Miranda has also chosen to diversify. That hasn't worked out great for Disney recently, but of course it was extremely successful with Lin-Manuel Miranda's Hamilton, and also Encanto was obviously a diverse film. Although it was, the Latino population, Latinos sometimes tend to be conservative. It's interesting. We'll see what happens. The review embargo lifts tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and let's hope it fares better than Indiana Jones and the very big mistake of debuting at Cannes. Whew, that went bad. Although I thought some of the publicity was unfair, with, again, Disney kind of being targeted. Somebody said, there was one headline that a friend sent me that said, 5-minute lukewarm standing ovation for Indiana Jones, yet just, beforehand, 5-minute amazing standing ovation for Top Gun Maverick. What? All right, so, anyway, is around 100 million really the best opening that we can do these days? So far this year, no movie has opened north of 150, although Super Mario Brothers came extremely close. We had 2 in 2022. 2021, of course, saw the phenomenal Spider-Man No Way Home opening weekend. And in 2019, pre-pandemic, which was just the best year ever for movies, 4 movies opened north of 150, including Endgame, which cracked 350. All so beautiful. Opening weekends are not what they used to be, though, for sure. I think it's a combination, and I'll be curious to hear what your thoughts are. Oversaturation of franchises, anger in the movie space, both politically as well as studios fighting with fans, and streaming. Not only does it give more options to stay at home, but I think it has dramatically shortened the theatrical window. Studios are playing with that a little bit, but we're not just talking about streaming services, but how quickly it goes to digital. So I think many moviegoers trained by the pandemic are happy to wait just to watch a movie at home due to preference and or cost. Cost also, of course, movie theaters are very expensive, although they do have subscription services these days. And some of you asked me how that works with box office. And with these depreciated opening weekends, I'm starting to wonder that too. How many of you used a subscription service like AMC A-List to go and see Fast X this weekend, for instance? I did. Of course, is it like the same problem as streaming services where it's really hard to carve up a subscription instead of having people pay a la carte? How did they carve up my $25 a month of all the movies I'm seeing? All right, now, of course, a movie can still make tons of money with a moderate opening. It's not the end of days if that happens. Avatar, Top Gun Maverick, and Jurassic World Dominion, the billion-dollar movies of last year, all had moderate opening weekends for blockbusters. And Super Mario Brothers, that opened close to 150, and that got to $1 billion, so it's doable, but, this is still, I think this is still a little bit concerning. As for streaming, starting with Nielsen, per usual, not too much movement this week. Nothing too big going on here. The Diplomat is a solid number 1. That's nice. While The Mandalorian went up a spot on the overall chart, and Beef still looks good, as does The Night Agent. And hey, Ted Lasso managed to pop back into the overall top 10. But nothing incredible is happening here. On the originals chart, though, it is nice to see The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. Still got it to a degree. Pretty low down on the chart, but at least she's there. We can't say the same for a lot of other shows, right? This is the show's final season, although, of course, this includes all seasons on Nielsen. But, appearing on the charts could only help star Rachel Brosnahan, who is rumored to be a long shot for Gunn's Lois Lane. On the acquired chart, unfortunately, Succession dropped back down this week after last week's surge after its incredible 3rd episode. It's still an industry, social media, and entertainment press darling, but when you get down to it, not a huge hit in terms of viewership. So I think maybe it was time for it to end. Let it get its all awards and the next big thing to come along. But fascinatingly, on the movies chart, this is kind of at least interesting. The 2017's The Snowman is number 1. A weak number 1 for sure, but that's an old movie that was in theaters, but it was such a bomb that it seems like a new movie for everybody to discover on Netflix. Sony's I Want to Dance with Somebody, their latest to hit Netflix thanks to their streaming deal, has finally found an audience. And I've said when I reviewed it that I thought it was best to stream it. And yikes, look at that. A lot of you are curious to how Ghosted did on Apple TV. And a couple of other, how did they make those calculation services put out some sexy headlines the week it was released? When you see the actual numbers come in, whew, that's bad. Debuting at number 7 and under 200. Under 200. That's so bad. Another huge flop for Chris Evans outside of Marvel, and not a great sign for Ana de Armas, who is set to take over the John Wick franchise as the ballerina. It did only debut on Friday of this window, but that's the weekend. And the number is so low, again, under 200, it's just a disaster. Over on Netflix's charts for just last week with movies, Jennifer Lopez says don't give up hope because she's had a ton of movies go direct to streaming lately, and only now has one finally connected with The Mother hitting Netflix for Mother's Day weekend. I know a number of you really enjoyed that, so I'm glad it worked out for her. She and Chris Hemsworth, interestingly, have very similar successes over at Netflix. And with series, Queen Charlotte continues the Bridgerton tradition of a strong week-to-week hold, while The Diplomat burned brightly but quickly, already down to number 8, but already renewed for season 3. And The Night Agent is still in the top 10, but Beef has fallen out. And for all the controversy, it didn't turn into views, as few watched Queen Cleopatra, which debuted at just number 7. Then on iTunes, sure enough, Super Mario Bros. Is number 1, having just debuted, while Sisu, riding the coattails of the similar John Wick, is number 2. That's pretty nice. John Wick Chapter 4, by the way, is already number 10 with pre-sale orders for this Tuesday, a very good sign. Should they make another John Wick? Maybe I would. There's strong interest in it, but I would give it a minute based on the oversaturation that we're seeing with some other franchises. And figure out how to bring him back in a way that's not going to make people upset or feel it's stupid. As for this, you don't need to come up with something after Jump the Shark, Nuke the Fridge, and then we don't need John Wick to come up with something new. As for this coming weekend, again, it's the Little Mermaid's turn to dive into the marketplace. With Robert De Niro, Gerard Butler, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, and comedian Bert Kreischer all also trying to take advantage of the long holiday weekend with much smaller films. It's crazy those are getting theatrical releases, in fact. But hey, sometimes it's stipulated in the contract. As I said, on digital, John Wick Chapter 4 becomes available on Tuesday. Have you pre-ordered? While I could see I think it would be nice to, great soundtrack, great sequences that I can see people wanting to see again and again. The final stuff in France, amazing. While on Dragon's Breath, so amazing. I still don't like the first half of the movie though. While on streaming, it's all series this week. Monday has Prehistoric Planet returning on Apple TV. Tuesday, HBO Max becomes Max. You would think we would have seen more advertising for that. Maybe we'll see what happens. And they drop some new series to celebrate: Gremlins, Smartless, the return of Clone High like 20 years later, and What Am I Eating with Zooey Deschanel. I'm very curious to see what the Max launch looks like. as I said, so far, very little fanfare. Maybe that's the strategy. Maybe they're like, maybe people won't notice. I'm like, I think we're gonna notice when the interface changes, which they still haven't debuted it really, by the way. Like, showed it a little bit. All right, I'm gonna miss HBO Max, boy. By the way, I had a choice. I rewatched Giant last night, and I had a choice of where to watch it on multiple streaming services. And I picked HBO Max because I just feel there's such great quality there, And it was kind of sad to think that's going away. All right, so maybe it won't, but I'm nervous. All right, Wednesday, American-Born Chinese starts on Disney+. Seth Rogen and Rose Byrne reteam for Platonic on Apple TV, which seems a little bit of an edgier Ted Lasso and Shrinking, so we'll see if that connects. And The Clearing starts on Hulu. Well, on Thursday, speaking of Hulu, the Kardashians are back after just getting a multi-season renewal, while Arnold Schwarzenegger is back, this time on Netflix with his new father-daughter spy series, Fubar. He's, of course, obviously a Republican, but he's been very outspoken against the more extreme parts of the party these days. So we'll see if conservatives rally in support around his show. He's already talking about how much he likes Yellowstone. So that's this week's Movie Math. What have you been watching? What do you plan to watch? What do you think of Fast X's opening? How Guardians of the Galaxy is holding up? And what are your expectations for The Little Mermaid? I'm curious. And also, what do you think of opening weekends these days? And why? Share those thoughts down below. Subscribe today. And of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.